Concord is finished. It's a wrap. It is never coming back. It is now officially the biggest video game failure of all time. And while I'll be perfectly happy to dance on this game's grave along with everyone else, I think it's super fucked that they're also shutting down the studio. Let's talk about it. It came out earlier today that Sony is shutting down 2 studios, most notably Firewalk, who made Concord, but also another studio, Neon Koi, who is making mobile games. We'll talk about that one at the end because this is what everyone's really focused on. I think a lot of people are under the impression that they were going to at least try to bring this game back as like a free-to-play game or something. Just considering how much money they spent on it. I don't care about this IP, but just like pragmatically, if you're going to spend $200 to $400 million, depending on who you ask, on this game, to give it 2 weeks and then just be like, nah, there's no salvaging this, I think that's kind of crazy. Especially considering it's getting its own episode in Secret Level, which is an anthology series coming to Amazon Prime later, and each episode is going to focus on a different video game IP. Concord is getting a whole episode, and I thought for sure they were at least going to wait till that's out and see if maybe that moved the needle on people's interests whatsoever. Well, that episode is now going to be a funeral because they're officially done. They're walking away from it completely. But I want to talk about them shutting down Firewalk Studios. I think it's super fucked up to buy a company and then after their first release that you bought them for doesn't pan out the way that you thought it was going to. You just shutter the entire studio and lay almost everyone off. They're going to try to place some people in other positions in other studios, but like effectively a lot of people are getting laid off because the game that, again, they bought them to make and to finish didn't pan out the way they thought it was going to. And you might be asking, what could you do with this studio? You're not realistically going to trust them with another $200 million and 5 more years of development to like make another IP that might flop. But there's a lot of other things you could have done with them. You could have had them work on remasters of beloved first-person shooter titles people want to see brought back. You could have had them work on a VR title, ideally like a first-person shooter, but like give them $40 million and have them put out a VR title in like a year. Like you could have done that. Or you could have revived an old live service project that you gave up on because the studio that was making it didn't want to focus on live service. Well, guess what? Now you have a live service studio that doesn't have a project. Why don't you just have them finish something like this, or the Great Web, or the Twisted Metal game, or any of the other live service projects that were dropped by your single-player studios? I don't care how bad Concord is or how much it flops. Shutting the studio down after you just acquired them for Concord is such disgusting business practice. They also shut down Neon Koi, which is a mobile studio that they also just acquired that hasn't put out a game yet. Apparently, the game that they were working on just wasn't shaping up to be a viable project. There's not as much information about Neon Koi. I'm not as familiar with them, so I don't want to speak about it too much. But it's also important to note that all these guys just got acquired and also just lost their jobs. Obviously, layoffs happen, studio shutdowns happen, but I think it's a completely different monster to acquire a studio and then almost immediately just shut them down. Like, that is